This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us this Monday, a very special program that is started off by Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. He joins us for this week's cattle market update. Also ahead, NASA scientists Brad Doorn, Hayne, and Forest Melton kindly joined us at Agriculture Today to discuss their week-long tour of and visit with K-State Research and Extension and Kansas producers. They explained their goal of creating data analytic tools with producers' needs in mind and the ongoing relationship between the team with NASA and our very own KSRE specialists. We end with this week's wildlife segment from K-State Wildlife Extension Specialist Drew Ricketts. He provides information on 4 programs that assist with converting land back into native wildlife habitat. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are joined now by Derrell Peel. He is a livestock economist coming to us out of Oklahoma State University. And Derrell, you're going to be covering our cattle market report this week, so thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let's start off, as we always do, taking a look at what the cash market has really done in the last week or so.
Yeah, you bet. Fed cattle markets have been pretty steady for the most part. Well, it depends on where you are. In the Southern Plains, in the low 140s. In the Midwest, more in the upper 140s. There's been a wider than normal difference in those prices regionally all summer, really. And that continues at this point, but that market's pretty steady. Feeder cattle markets continue to strengthen. We've seen stronger feeder cattle markets all the way from the lightweight stocker calves all the way through the big feeder cattle recently. So those prices continue. And then, on the cull cow market, we've had some volatility, and obviously lots of cows coming to town as a result of the drought. But those prices actually continue very, very strong.
Excellent. That's good to hear. And then are futures kind of following the same pattern that we're seeing in our cash markets currently, or are they a little bit worse for wear?
Well, again, the futures have a lot of volatility, and in part, that's their job. So they're reacting to a lot of things. In general, I think they're holding in there pretty well. From a longer-term perspective, on a day-to-day basis, they kind of jump around. And so if you're getting in and out of those markets, you got to look at that a little more carefully. On a longer-term trend, one of the things that's pretty clear built into the futures is the fact that we've got stronger prices ahead. The really big picture for the next several months to beyond even is that numbers get tighter, supplies get tighter, the supply fundamentals really become supportive, and that's priced into these both feeder and fed cattle or live cattle futures markets at this point as you look out to the deferred contracts.
Absolutely. Hopefully that'll be some encouragement for producers to hold on to some of their livestock a little bit longer. But also in the general market scheme of things, box beef, have those markets really changed any in the last week or so? They've been pretty consistent throughout the summer.
They have. Box beef has operated in a very narrow trading range, really back to about April. And so we've seen, and I interpret that to be really kind of a sign that beef demand has been sort of capped or muted, if you will, at the consumer level. Obviously consumers have got lots of challenges with inflation, and we've had high gas prices. We're seeing a little relief on that and so on. I think beef demand is still fundamentally strong, but it's been a little bit capped, if you will, just because there have been some pressure on the consumers. And in the box beef market, again, it's operated in a very narrow trading range sideways. We did not see some of the seasonal patterns that we normally expect coming into, let's say, the summer grilling season. And then since then, maybe we haven't seen the summer kind of doldrums, the weakness that we often see in the midsummer. It's just been a very consistent sideways narrow trading range.
Sure. And like you mentioned, there's ebbs and flows in what we anticipate most of the time. So consistency isn't always bad in some of these situations.
Well, given everything that we're in, right? And so we've got lots of issues on the consumer side, the macroeconomic side, lots of uncertainty as well as pressures that are clearly there. And then we've got these supply dynamics and other things going on. So, yeah, in the long term, consistent markets is a pleasant surprise, I think, for this industry in the, for the time being anyway.
Absolutely. We had a recent report released here for August. It's the Cattle on Feed report for this month, but we were talking beforehand. These always confuse me. It's the August report, but it's for our data from July, right? So let's talk a little bit about that Cattle on Feed report.
Yeah, the August cattle on feed report showed, again, cattle on feed inventories were actually a little bit higher than expected, up about 1%, a little bit over 1%. And that was based on the fact that July placements were significantly bigger than analysts expected going into the report. But if you look at the weight breakdown in that report, it's the same thing we've been seeing now very consistently for the last 3 months. All of that increase in placements is coming from lightweight animals. And I think, the drought is sort of aiding and abetting this process of pulling cattle forward. Obviously, there's stress out in the country, so producers are weaning early. They're marketing these calves early. They're probably marketing some summer stockers ahead of schedule just for lack of forage. And so they're showing up in the feedlots. And we've been doing this for about 3 months. And, you can't do it forever, right? You can place them early once, but then they're not there later. And so we expect these numbers to tighten up at some point, but it has taken longer to get there because of the drought sort of adding to this pressure. So the bottom line is we placed more cattle. They were very lightweight. In fact, the heavyweight placements for the last several months have been down. And what that means is over the last 3 months, we placed a lot of cattle that are going to come out in the November and beyond period into the first quarter of next year. But we don't have as many heavyweight cattle. And I think that's part of what's helping support the fed cattle market right now is that we're plenty current. There's no indications that feedlots are not current. And we're actually going to see relatively tight supplies on feedlot cattle here through, the rest of the third quarter anyway. And then we'll get into those lighter weight numbers a little bit later. I don't think it's necessarily a problem for the market, but I do think we have got a little bit of a gap here that's helping support the market.
We have a semi-annual cattle inventory that's released. What has that really shown? Has it been surprising, or with all the liquidation that we've really been talking about all summer now at this point, is it living up to what we thought?
Well, it is. I mean, we anticipated that the drought, last year and this year has forced us to liquidate cows. Cattle slaughter is actually up for the year. We thought it would be down, and we still think it's going to turn lower here in the last part of the year. But cattle slaughter has been up, and it's all been on the female side. So heifer slaughter is running 4.4% above a year ago, while steer slaughter for the year to date is down about 2.1%. And so, that's clearly drought driven. Cow slaughter is up about 5.8% for total. Beef cow part of that is up about nearly 14% still. And so, one of the things that's unique in this environment is that female slaughter, cow plus heifer slaughter this year is almost 51% of total cattle slaughter.
Wow.
Which has not happened really since the mid-1980s. So it says that that's part of what's supporting production and slaughter here in the short run, but it also says that in the future we're going to see some very tight supplies. We are sort of unwinding the breeding herd here in terms of both cows and heifers, and that will become much more apparent in the coming months. And so the fact that the mid-year cattle inventory numbers were down wasn't a surprise. Feeder supplies come in lower, both in January and in the July report. And yet feedlots, again, because of the drought, have been able in the short run to keep these placements a little bit higher than expected. But we can't do that forever. There's not more cattle out there. It's just a question of the timing.
Sure, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier that we expected slaughter numbers to actually be down this year before everything actually played out. Why was that? What was the change between now and then that changed kind of what we're seeing?
This has been a really interesting process. It really goes all the way back to the beginning of the pandemic in a long-term sense. So, cattle inventories peaked on a January basis in 2019. Calf crop actually peaked in 2018. So we would have predicted that we would get into some lower feeder cattle supplies and feedlot production by 2020. Pandemic disrupted that, pushed some things off into 2021. So we were higher than expected last year. We started this year with the idea that slaughter would be down and beef production would drop about 2.5% this year. But we've had to revise that several times, and because we're still actually above a year ago at this point. We may come in now at the end of the year down perhaps 0.5% or maybe even with last year. All of that sets up the idea that, again, once we turn the corner into these tighter numbers, then next year we're probably looking at 3 to 4% decrease in beef production minimally, and it could be even higher than that.
Wow. So is that a more rapid decrease than we were even anticipating if things would have gone as expected this year? Or is it kind of on par with the drop that we would have probably anticipated anyways?
No, there's little doubt that the drought is accelerating the herd liquidation. Started last year. We were already in cyclical liquidation again from that peak in 2019. But the drought last year accelerated it. The drought this year has accelerated it even more. And it's taking us lower than we really want to be or frankly need to be. But Mother Nature's in control here right now. And until things change, we won't be able to stop the liquidation. Then we'll stabilize, and then we'll try to turn around and rebuild this thing. That's all going to play out over the next 1 to 3 years.
Absolutely. Well, Derrell, I know I see your name pop up everywhere when I'm combing through my daily emails that I get in the morning, names on articles. But if listeners are tuning in and they're wanting to find more information from you on the latest on the cattle markets, where can they find that at?
Well, you can always contact me directly at derrell.peel@okstate.edu. I write a weekly newsletter, and if you're interested in getting that, that's some of the things you see. It gets redistributed places, but if you're interested in getting that directly from me and some of my animal science colleagues, you can send me an email, derrell.peel@okstate.edu. We'll be happy to put you on the distribution list for that newsletter.
Excellent. Well, I'll include your email in the show notes of today's program, so that way it's easy to find for listeners that are tuning in and want to take part in that opportunity. But as always, Derrell, thank you so much for your time today.
You're very welcome.
Once again, that was Derrell Peel. He is a livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University, covering this week's cattle market update. Still ahead of us this Monday, we'll return with NASA scientists Brad Doorn, Chris Hayne, and Forest Melton. They kindly join us to discuss their week-long tour of and visit with K-State Research and Extension and Kansas producers. They explain their goal of listening to producers' needs and creating data analytic tools with those producers' needs in mind, and the ongoing relationship between the team with NASA and our very own KSRE specialists. Once again, we're about to cut to a short break, but we'll be back with that and more here on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now, joined by 3 special guests that are actually members of NASA's Earth Science team. I'll introduce the 3 of them now and have them explain a little bit about each of their roles. Today we are joined by Brad Doorn.
Hi, I'm Brad Doorn. I'm the Agriculture and Water Resources Program Manager.
Chris Hayne.
Hi, my name's Chris Hayne. I'm a research scientist at Marshall Space Flight Center and also the project scientist for the Short-Term Prediction Research and Transition Center at NASA.
And Forest Melton.
Hi, I'm Forest Melton. I'm the Chief Scientist for the NASA Western Water Applications Office, and I work on applications of satellite data for water resources management and agricultural production.
Most people, when they think of NASA, the first thing they probably think of is astronauts, right? But I believe I heard earlier that you guys are a part of the largest division. The Earth Science Division is the largest division with NASA. So for listeners that are tuning in that maybe aren't familiar with some of the work that you guys do with the resources here on Earth, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, we're the largest science division within NASA, so there's some really big parts of NASA. And we want to make it known that as part of that, and as part of the global Earth science analysis, agriculture is a key component of it.
Yeah, so I think, from my perspective, it's really important for people to understand that NASA's here to study the planet we live on and not just explore space. This is the one planet we have to live on, and understanding how to do that in a way that allows us to both do it in a sustainable way and also just make it so that, for producers, that we can provide Earth observation data that makes their decision-making process easier. And so it's really important that NASA both looks out and looks back at the Earth that we do live on.
And I'll just add that the program that Brad runs is in the Applied Sciences program. So our mission is to take the scientific and technical advances that NASA is producing and turn those into benefits for folks back here on the home planet, right? And so a key part of what our program does is work closely with partners in the agricultural sector, work with water resource managers to develop applications that they can use to support their day-to-day operations and decision-makings. And we do that in partnership, working closely with those folks to help develop tools that can be used operationally.
Excellent. Well, you guys have been very busy here in the last week. I know you've been exploring a lot of Kansas, but most of your time has been spent here with officials here at K-State, which is fantastic. So tell us a little bit about why your team has been in Kansas specifically and kind of your goals with this trip.
2 or 3 goals. First goal is to listen. We really, as applied researchers, we understand that the problems that we're trying to solve are defined by the applications, that is, the producers, the ag industry. So those problems are the ones we want to try to solve. So we bring those back and try to then develop capabilities, whether it's near term or maybe long term. And so that's why that's the discussions we've had with farmers across the state. And then coming to K-State and also, working with K-State throughout this tour, as the Extension Service and the land-grant universities, they're the key partner in order to deliver those solutions. And so we want to work with them to help us understand how we can deliver our data and our information in such a way that the producers can use it, can sustain it over a longer term.
From the standpoint of what Brad was saying, is we're here to listen. We want to honestly understand what the challenge is so that we can go back and work with researchers at a university like K-State to develop science-driven solutions to problems that exist in the field. We don't want to develop something and then try to tell a producer they need it. We want to understand what the producer needs and then develop a solution that actually addresses that. It really just allows us to turn around science in a more productive manner. Sometimes as scientists we think we know what a producer needs, and I think what we've learned is having that first conversation, listening to what they need, understanding what their decisions are like, allows us to develop science that's more impactful.
Absolutely. It sounds like a technique that streamlines the process for sure, a bit more efficient than, like you said, just assuming, which is excellent. And during this trip, you've mentioned you've spoken to multiple producers. What have those farm visits really been like for you guys?
They've been fantastic. I mean, we really appreciate the open discussions, the conversations we've had with farmers and ranchers across Kansas. Learned a lot about what tools and technologies they're currently using. We've heard a lot about the value of everything from being able to control and manage pivot irrigation from your phone, but also heard about some of the commercial platforms, both tractor-mounted, center pivot-mounted, and also commercial and public space observations that are starting to be used to manage operations on the farm. And then heard about some of the tools folks would like to see in terms of additional data and information products to support irrigation management, improved short-term forecast of evapotranspiration and precipitation, better understanding of what's happening in soil moisture and soil organic matter, and then improved tools to help with mapping and detection of various weeds and crop pests and pathogens. So really helpful to hear both about the technologies that are working well, how folks would like to access information and use it, as well as where there are still information gaps that could potentially be addressed in partnership between NASA, our partners here at Kansas State, working with extension specialists and some of the commodity groups and co-ops as well.
Bill, on what Forrest said, I think one of the main things I've taken home is that while producers are open to engaging with technology, their time is valuable, and being able to provide them actionable information, actionable data is more important than just giving them the pretty picture that we can take from space. And so taking that pretty picture that we can take from space and turning it into actionable information that they can actually go out in their field and actually diagnose a problem that they might see from satellite is allowing them to not, we can't rely on them to be the data analysis while also doing their normal job. So I think it's very important for us as scientists to help develop tools that allow them to look at the most impactful data that they can get and then use that to make a decision.
Absolutely. Precision ag becoming more and more of a hot button topic among everyday producers. It's so cool to see the development of that technology over time, and it's cool to know that NASA's playing a key role in hoping to support that mission. So it's awesome. I was hearing Dean Ernie Minton talk about this new relationship between NASA and our university, and really it just brought to mind how perfect of a combination this relationship really is. Land grants were established with agriculture and mechanics at the time, but ultimately engineering in mind. So land grants like K-State and NASA, I think this is a match made in heaven in my mind. Tell us a little bit about what you hope this relationship turns into over time, or kind of the growth of it that you expect.
It's not that, the land grants are new, and it's not that NASA's relationship with universities across the country is new. I think it's a renewed emphasis that we need to get this information down to producers, and that the land grants and the extension services are a key conduit of that. And there's a number of different components of that. It's workforce development, how we train the professionals that are coming out of undergrad to know that this capability exists and how to use it and how to look at it. And of course, there's basic research problems. How do we make sure that those basic research challenges are addressed by our research organizations like NASA? How do we make sure that the universities and these problems are connected with our missions? We know there's connections between K-State and some of NASA missions. How do we make sure that that goes the full gamut between the mission to the research to the applied research that ultimately gets to an end user? So we're going to have some follow-ups to talk about all components: education and training, workforce development, research, basic research, then, of course, extension. And how do we take research and get it in a way that the end users can really use it? So we're going to follow up with them and find ways to make these connections. And I think one last thing is that we're looking more and more at partnerships for domestic ag across the United States through our consortiums like the Western Water Applications Office, through our NASA Harvest, and through a new consortium on agriculture that's going to come online. Those will really help us work these relationships with universities. And the other component of this is there's work going on in other research areas like NSF, our research program, other areas that are doing similar things that we ought to be connected with. So it goes both ways, So through that synergy, I think we're going to have a lot of good success.
I'll add that another thing we heard was how much research individual farmers and ranchers are doing in their operations and conducting their own science and evaluation of technologies, trying different practices. And so I think that's another key area that we can support with additional tools and data analysis, potentially even trainings to support on-farm research and application development. A big part of what NASA is also working on is open data and science initiatives that would make it easier to pull data from NASA satellite missions, from some of the modeling capabilities we're developing, into platforms that individual agricultural organizations or some of their commercial partners may be developing. In the future, it might be that folks are using NASA satellite data every day and never realize it, and that would be fine too.
Excellent. Well, thank you guys so much for your time, not only in this interview, but just welcoming you guys to K-State, and I hope it was a benefit for you guys as much as it was for us. But if listeners are tuning in and they're thinking, well, I want to know more about this program, maybe it's something they never knew about before, where might be some good resources for them to first start with or check out?
Yeah, certainly Google NASA agriculture, and you'll see our website in the program. But that's just the beginning. There's ways to get feedback there. We've made tools where they can, put questions in, and then we can help direct where we might inform you. The other places, come to your K-State program. There's a lot of knowledge about NASA sitting right here in your own university. So go to the agriculture department, go to the engineering department, civil engineering, or geography department, and that will be another great place for them to go.
Once again, those were NASA scientists Brad Doorn, Chris Hayne, and Forest Melton. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly wildlife segment, and covering it this week, we have with us Drew Ricketts, our wildlife extension specialist here at K-State. And this week, Drew, you want to talk to us about a few different programs when it comes to habitat management. Really some great programs out there to help with that.
A lot of the things that we talk about when we're thinking about habitat management for wildlife are expensive, and they also a lot of times don't have a monetary return like other agricultural practices. So these programs are really important when we're thinking about managing private lands for wildlife habitat.
We have 4 programs we're going to cover here today. First one being Habitat First. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's a program that Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks runs. It's funded by Pittman Robertson dollars, which easy way to think about that is when a firearm or other hunting equipment leaves a manufacturer, there's an 11% excise tax that's charged on that. And that funds wildlife research, wildlife habitat improvement. And so states get a piece of that pot of money, and they can spend it on very specific things. So we have this Habitat First program, and you can find out a lot of information about it in a couple of different ways. One would be going to Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks' website and searching for Habitat First. The other way would be to reach out to a local biologist. And the reason I kind of jumped right into that is because there's a lot lots and lots of different practices and different payment rates. But one of the things that I really like about Habitat First is it's one of the more simple of the programs out there. So let's say you want to convert some brome or fescue back to native grass like we talked about last time. They have a per acre rate that they will pay for herbicide application for that specific purpose, and they have a per acre rate that they will pay for grass seed. That's just one example, but first step is going to be to reach out to Wildlife and Parks. You can find out who your local area biologist is. They'll set up a site visit with you. You can talk about your goals and set up a contract if that's something you're interested in.
Moving on to our next one, EQIP is what the program is called.
Yeah, EQIP, and that stands for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program, and that's one that a lot of agricultural producers are going to be familiar with. When we think about the wildlife aspects of that, there are specific parts of that program that are wildlife driven. So if we're thinking about managing rangelands for quail or prairie chickens, there's prescribed fire, there's tree removal, and this is intended to be a cost share program, so the NRCS would cover 50%, the producer would cover 50%.
The next one is a little bit unique. It's Partners for Fish and Wildlife. Tell us a little bit about that.
That is the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Working Landscapes program. And when we think about a working landscape, that's how biologists and government land managers think about private land that's being managed for agricultural production and wildlife at the same time. What that program does is focus on specific species that their populations are imperiled in some way. In Kansas, the main focal species are going to be greater and lesser prairie chickens. This program is really cool in that it's a cost share program, but the producer's share of that cost can be implementing some of the practices that the producer and the biologist decide need to be done. And so if we're thinking about prescribed fire and tree removal, if the producer gets the area that's under contract burned a certain number of times during the contract period, that can be their share of the cost, and then the tree removal could be totally covered. And so if there's some tree removal that needs to be done and a producer's interested in wildlife management and they're in either the lesser prairie chicken range or the greater prairie chicken range, this can be a very good program for them.
This next one's one that our listeners commonly hear about from our friends at the Farm Service Agency, but it's the CRP program. Tell us a little bit about it.
Conservation Reserve Program originally was not established with wildlife in mind. It's basically an erosion program and a program to help balance out commodities markets. But anytime we're planting native grass in areas where they're lacking, it improves habitat for wildlife. And over time, there have been some things added to CRP that are wildlife driven. So the state acres for wildlife enhancement, that is one that's specifically wildlife driven, and a lot of that is the corners that we see in center pivot irrigation systems where the corners are planted to native grass, that permanent cover that's really good for pheasants and quail. It's just one example. There's a whole bunch of them.
As always, links to each of these programs will be in the show notes of today's program, which can be found on agtoday.net. But Drew, as always, thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Samantha.
Once again, that was Drew Ricketts, our Wildlife Extension Specialist here at K-State, covering 4 habitat management programs. That concludes today's programming. We'll be back with more tomorrow on Agriculture Today.